They mocked her cooking skills at the family dinner, laughing loudly as she quietly cleared the plates. Their words hurt more than the hot oil that had once burned her hands. But Kamsi said nothing. Her face stayed calm, but her eyes said something else, a quiet promise. Tonight, she would serve more than food. The Okafor family house in Enugu was busy and loud. It was the yearly New Year's reunion dinner, and everyone was preparing. Children ran around. Aunties argued over decorations. The smell of spices filled the air. In the middle of all the noise, Kamsi moved quietly. She was the wife of the last son, Ebuka. Unlike others in the main house, she and her husband lived in the small boys' quarters at the back, a silent reminder that she didn't really belong. She had been asked to cook one dish for the dinner, just one. Light soup, they told her. Simple, easy. But Kamsi knew the truth. They expected her to fail. Her sisters-in-law, especially Amaka and Ifi, made loud jokes as she walked past. "Please don't burn it this time," Amaka laughed, pretending to wave away smoke. "Let's keep fire extinguishers close," Ifi added, rolling her eyes. They burst into loud laughter. Kamsi didn't respond. She lowered her head and walked into the kitchen. Her husband, Ebuka, was nearby. He heard the jokes, saw the laughter, and simply gave a weak smile. "Just do your best," he muttered, not looking her in the eye. Kamsi felt a familiar sting in her chest. She had hoped he would defend her, even just once. But like always, he stayed silent. The message was clear. She was alone. As she prepared her ingredients, she remembered last year's dinner. Her soup had been too salty. The year before that, undercooked meat. Every mistake became a family story, retold and laughed over. They never let her forget. Still, she didn't complain. She didn't argue. But inside her, something had changed. She chopped the vegetables with steady hands. The noise around her faded. She was calm, but it was a calm before a storm. This time, she would not cook to please them. She would cook for herself, and they would see. Kamsi used to be full of life. She was once a bright and confident young woman with big dreams. Back in Abuja, she studied culinary arts. Her dream was to become a top chef, open her own restaurant, and share her grandmother's recipes with the world. She loved the smell of spices, the rhythm of chopping, the soft sound of soup simmering. Cooking wasn't just something she did, it was who she was. But then came Ebuka. He was charming, soft-spoken, and came from a well-known family in Enugu. When they fell in love, she thought she could still chase her dream. But pressure came from all sides, especially from his family. They didn't want a working wife. They wanted a quiet, humble daughter-in-law, someone decent, traditional. His mother, Mama Okafor, called Kamsi too modern and too forward. She didn't like how Kamsi talked about business and careers. She wanted someone who would focus on family, not fame. Slowly, Kamsi gave up her dream. She left school, moved to Enugu, and married Ebuka. At first, she thought it was just a small sacrifice, but the small things added up. A rude comment here, a cold stare there. The family never accepted her. She was always the outsider, the one who didn't quite fit in. She and Ebuka weren't given a room in the main house like his brothers and their wives. Instead, they were placed in the boys' quarters, a small, detached room behind the house. No one said it out loud, but everyone understood what it meant. She was at the bottom. Over the years, the mockery chipped away at her. Her sisters-in-law laughed at her clothes, her accent, and especially her cooking. Every time she made a mistake, it became a joke. They called her names like Chef Disaster and Salt Queen. Her confidence slowly disappeared. She started second-guessing herself, even in the kitchen, the one place she used to shine. Now, it was the morning of the New Year's dinner, and the house was in full swing. Decorations were going up, drinks were being chilled, and servants ran back and forth. The Okafors cared deeply about how they looked in public. Every detail had to be perfect, especially because an important guest was coming. Chief Dyke, a powerful local politician with a sharp tongue and a love for food. The family was tense. If Chief Dyke enjoyed himself, it could bring favors and opportunities. If he didn't, it would be an embarrassment. In the middle of all this, Mama Okafor turned to Kamsi and said, "We need you to make light soup for the chief, just a simple one." Kamsi paused. She knew why they picked her, not because they trusted her, but because they didn't. If she failed, she'd be the one to blame, not them. Still, she nodded. Okay. Her voice was soft, but her heart was loud. Something inside her had begun to wake up. Later that evening, Ebuka came into their small room. He sat on the edge of the bed and rubbed his hands together. Just don't embarrass us again, he said. No encouragement, no support, just fear of failure. Kamsi looked at him, but said nothing. What was there to say? He had long ago stopped standing up for her. She walked to the small window and looked out at the main house. The lights were bright, music played, people laughed, but inside her, it was quiet. She closed her eyes and remembered her first day in culinary school, the feel of the apron, the scent of hot jollof rice, the smile of her teacher when she got her first dish right. She remembered her grandmother, Mama Adeza, who once told her, cooking is not just food, it's power, it's heart, it's memory. Tonight, she would cook, not to impress, not to prove a point, but to take back the part of her that she had buried too deep for too long. Kamsi worked quietly in the kitchen as the noise of the reunion buzzed in the background. The main house was full of laughter, music, and chatter. Everyone was dressed in their finest clothes. The air smelled of perfume, jollof rice, grilled meat, and something bitter Kamsi couldn't name. She had just finished preparing the ingredients for the light soup when she stepped out for a moment to get something from the pantry. When she returned, everything looked the same, or so she thought. She didn't know that Amaka and Ife had slipped in while she was away. They giggled as they poured vinegar into her stock, added twice the amount of salt, and swapped her fresh pepper with old, bitter powder. She won't know the difference, Amaka whispered, smirking. She never does, Ife said. Let's give them something to talk about. Then they left, smiling sweetly as they passed by guests in the hallway. To everyone else, they were helpful, caring sisters-in-law, but behind their soft voices and pretty smiles were sharp knives. As Kamsi returned to her pot and stirred the soup, she didn't notice the changes yet. The smell was off, but she thought maybe she was tired. She tasted it and paused. Something was wrong. Her face didn't change, but inside she began to worry. I measured everything, she whispered to herself. A few minutes later, Chuka, a distant cousin from the village who had been helping arrange the seats, wandered into the kitchen. He was young, talkative, and unaware of the family politics. He sat on the stool near the door, chewing on chin-chin. Auntie Kamsi, he said, I heard they want to joke about your food again tonight. They even picked a nickname for the dish, something like disaster soup. It's their yearly tradition, right? Kamsi froze. She turned slowly toward him. Who said that? She asked, her voice flat. Oh, I don't know. I just heard Auntie Ife laughing with the others. They said even if you surprise them, they'll still make it a joke for the chief. You know, to keep the mood light. Chuka laughed, unaware of the storm he had just stirred. Kamsi didn't respond. She simply nodded. Thank you, she said softly, and he walked away. She stood still for a long time. Her chest ached, her eyes stung, but she refused to cry. She walked to the pot and took another spoonful. This time she tasted the bitterness clearly. They had tampered with it. She looked around the kitchen. Her hands shook for a second, but she steadied them. She walked outside, past the main house, back to her small room. Inside a wooden box under her bed was a brown notebook, old, stained, and full of handwritten recipes. It belonged to her grandmother, Mama Adez. She hadn't opened it in years. She turned to a page near the end. There it was, Ofe Adez, her grandmother's special light soup recipe. It had a blend of spices only her grandmother used and a secret process for boiling the meat that made it melt in the mouth. She remembered her grandmother's words. Don't share this recipe until you're ready to cook with your heart again. That night, long after most people had gone to sleep, Kamsi returned to the kitchen alone. She dumped the tampered soup down the sink. She cleaned the pot slowly, carefully. She took out fresh ingredients from the small fridge she had brought from her quarters, untouched, safe. Then she began again. She boiled the meat using her grandmother's method. She roasted the fresh pepper over an open flame. She crushed the spices with her hands, the way Mama Adazi had taught her. She didn't rush. She didn't panic. Outside, the rain began to fall softly. The house was quiet. Only the soft bubbling of the pot and the sound of her chopping filled the space. Her eyes were steady. Her heart beat calmly. She wasn't cooking to impress them anymore. She was cooking to remember who she was. Every step felt like healing. Every stir of the pot was a stitch in the torn fabric of her pride. The soup thickened. The aroma filled the kitchen, rich and deep. It didn't smell like fear. It didn't smell like shame. It smelled like memory, like love, like power. She tasted it and smiled, a small quiet smile. They thought they had broken her, but they didn't know that fire only made gold shine brighter. The morning of the dinner was full of noise and movement. The Okafor house buzzed with last-minute arrangements. Decorations were being adjusted, plates polished, and flower vases placed just right. Servants rushed in and out, carrying trays, mopping the floor, fixing lights. Every room echoed with footsteps, laughter, and commands. In the middle of it all, Ebuka paced nervously. He had just heard a guest whisper that Chief Dyke, the politician, was very picky about food. He once walked out of a party because the soup was too watery. Another time he publicly criticised a caterer for using market spices instead of fresh ones. Ebuka wiped his forehead. "We can't afford embarrassment," he muttered, mostly to himself. Meanwhile, Amaka and Ife sat in the guest room upstairs, getting their makeup done. Their voices could be heard through the thin door, laughing in low tones. "I can't wait to see the chief's face when he tastes her mess," Amaka said, curling her eyelashes. "She'll probably cry again," Ife replied. "It's like a yearly show at this point." They laughed harder, sipping juice and fixing their gel in the mirror. They were so sure of how the night would go. But downstairs, Kamsi was not the same woman they knew. She moved like water, calm, flowing, but impossible to stop. She didn't speak unless necessary. Her hands were steady. Her eyes didn't dart around nervously like before. She didn't flinch at the sound of laughter or side comments. She wore a simple wrapper and blouse, tied tightly, her hair packed back. No makeup, just purpose. As the time neared, trays of food began leaving the kitchen. Jollof rice, peppered chicken, moi moi, pounded yam. Then finally, the tray with her light soup and goat meat was carried out. She followed behind it slowly, wiping her hands. Guests filled the long dining hall. Men in agbadas and women in lace blouses filled the room with chatter and perfume. Chief Dyke sat at the head of the table, fanning himself with a paper hand fan. He had already made a face when the pepper soup was served earlier. Not a good sign. Ebuka sat stiffly beside his brothers. His mother looked tense but proud, greeting guests as if nothing could go wrong. When Kamsi's soup was served, many guests barely looked at it. Some took small portions out of politeness. The sisters-in-law watched closely, ready to smirk. Then the aroma hit. The scent rolled across the table slowly, wrapping around each guest like a warm hand. It smelled deep, rich, smoky, layered with spices no one could name. A few noses twitched, heads turned. Someone took a spoonful, another followed, then silence. Eyebrows raised, eyes widened. A man from the governor's office looked at his bowl, then back at the server. Who made this? The chief himself picked up his spoon, tasted the soup, and paused. For a long moment, no one breathed. Then he spoke. "This is excellent." Chairs shifted, people leaned forward. "Who made this soup?" he asked again, louder now. Mama Okafor opened her mouth, unsure what to say. Kamsi stepped forward. "I did, sir." Silence. Heads turned. Kamsi didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She just stood tall, her hands folded in front of her apron. "You?" the chief asked, surprised. "Yes." He nodded slowly, impressed. "You have hands, my dear. I haven't tasted soup like this in years." He turned to a servant. "Pack some for takeaway. I'm not leaving without it." There were gasps. Someone clapped lightly. Another guest asked for a second serving. The sisters-in-law sat frozen. Ife dropped her fork. Amaka's eyes twitched, but she said nothing. Ebuka stared at Kamsi. He didn't look proud. He looked confused. Then his jaw tightened. He didn't say, "Well done." He didn't clap. He simply looked down, like someone who had just lost something. More guests began asking questions. "What spices did you use? Do you have a restaurant? Can you cater for my daughter's wedding?" Kamsi answered calmly. "I don't own a restaurant yet," she said, "but I'm working on it." For the first time in that house, people saw her, not as a wife, not as a servant, not as the outsider in the boys' quarters, but as a woman of skill, depth, and quiet power. As the night went on, laughter returned to the room. But it was different now. It wasn't laughter at her. It was laughter around her, and she stood right in the middle of it, untouched, unbothered. The room had changed, and so had she. As the dinner came to an end, a toast was called in honor of the successful night. Chief Dyke stood up, raising his glass of palm wine with a satisfied smile on his face. "I must say," he began, "I came here expecting the usual. Speeches, noise, dry jollof rice. But this soup," he paused, looking at his empty plate. "It reminded me of something I tasted many years ago, back when I was invited to a special culinary school in Ghana. Same depth, same pride. Whoever made this has real talent. He turned to Kamsi again. You must cater my wife's birthday next month. No debate. The room clapped. A few people turned to look at Kamsi with new eyes. She simply bowed her head in thanks. Amaka and Ife shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The glow was no longer on them. They were used to being the stars, loud, dressed up, admired. But tonight, no one noticed their designer shoes or expensive makeup. All eyes were on the woman they had once called the disgrace in the kitchen. Thinking fast, Amaka stood up with a wide smile. Yes, oh, we thank God for teamwork. Kamsi cooked it, but we all helped here and there. It was a joint family effort. Ife nodded quickly. We were in the kitchen all afternoon together, tasting and advising. That's how we do in this house. Unity. The guests smiled politely, but Kamsi took a slow breath and stepped forward. No, she said clearly. You didn't help me. The room quieted. She turned to Chief Dyke and the guests. Her voice was calm, but each word was sharp and clear. In fact, they tampered with my soup. I had already finished cooking when I found the ingredients had been changed. Extra salt, spoilt spices, bitter pepper. I had to throw everything away and start from the beginning, alone. At midnight, gasps. All conversation stopped. She reached into the basket she had brought from her quarters and pulled out a small clear bag. Inside were the tampered ingredients, labelled and tied neatly. I kept these, in case anyone tried to claim credit for my work. People murmured. Some looked shocked. Others exchanged glances. Ebuka stood up suddenly, his voice tight with anger. Must you say all this here? You're embarrassing us in front of our guests. Kamsi turned to him slowly. No, she said. You're embarrassed because the truth is no longer hidden. You never defended me. Not once. You heard them mock me. You saw how they treated me. You laughed along, and you let it continue. Ebuka's jaw clenched, but he had no reply. I was never looking for pity, Kamsi continued. I only wanted respect, but I see now that I had to earn it on my own. Mama Okafor stood, trying to take control. Enough, Kamsi. You've made your point. Let us not spoil the mood. But it was already too late. The guests now looked at the family differently. Their polite smiles had faded. Whispers began to rise. The image of a united, respectable Okafor family had cracked. Just then, a man in a navy blue kaftan, the owner of a fast-growing local restaurant chain, cleared his throat. Madam Kamsi, he said, I run Eden Bowl. Maybe you've heard of it. I've been searching for authentic flavors like yours for months. Would you be interested in a partnership? Kamsi blinked, surprised. She wasn't used to praise coming with opportunity, but she didn't hesitate. Yes, I'd love that. More applause. This time, the sisters-in-law didn't even fake a smile. The spotlight had shifted. The woman they once silenced now stood tall, unbothered, and unafraid, not because anyone gave her power, but because she reclaimed it herself. The morning after the dinner, the Okafor house felt different. The usual clatter of gossip and post-event excitement had been replaced with an uneasy silence. Kamsi moved through the kitchen, packing her few belongings. The curtains she had washed and pressed, the small radio she once used to pass the time, her few pots and pans, all were neatly arranged in boxes. She was not angry as she packed. There was no fire in her chest, no tears in her eyes. She had been angry once, but that was before. This time, there was only clarity. This was no longer the life she wanted. Ebuka had watched her all morning, silent and brooding. The past few days had been a whirlwind. His wife's surprising transformation, the public humiliation, the unexpected business opportunity for Kamsi. He hadn't been prepared for any of it. He couldn't even muster the strength to defend her when it counted. Now, with her leaving, it all felt too late. Please, Kamsi, he said quietly, standing in the doorway of the boys' quarters. Don't go. We can fix this, I swear. I'll talk to my family. Things will change. I'll change. Kamsi paused, the box in her hands trembling for just a second before she set it down. Ebuka, she began, her voice steady. You had the chance to change things. For years. I waited for you to stand up for me, to see me, but you didn't. You laughed with them when they mocked me. You watched me struggle and said nothing. I gave everything for this family, for you. But I see now, this isn't enough. I'm not enough for you. He reached out, but she stepped back, shaking her head. I already did, she said softly, her words heavy with meaning. I already made the change. Ibuka's eyes filled with a mix of regret and frustration, but there was nothing he could say. She was right, and she wasn't coming back. Kamsi closed the door behind her, leaving the house that had been her prison for so long. She walked out of the boys' quarters, no longer burdened by the weight of resentment, but carrying the promise of something new, a future that was hers to shape. She moved into a small apartment on the edge of town. It was modest but warm, with a tiny kitchen that felt like a sanctuary. The first few weeks were challenging. Kamsi worked tirelessly, setting up a small catering business. She started with simple orders, birthday parties, small gatherings, and church events, making sure every dish was perfect, every presentation a reflection of her newfound confidence. Her first big client came a few weeks later, the wife of Chief Dyke. The woman had been impressed by Kamsi's soup at the family dinner and had called her up to cater for an upcoming event. It was an opportunity Kamsi had prayed for but never expected. Her small apartment became a whirlwind of ingredients, plans, and late nights, as she carefully crafted each dish with the love and precision she had once reserved only for her family. Word spread quickly. Kamsi's name began to float through local circles, not as the quiet, invisible woman of the Okafor family, but as the woman whose food could change a room. People spoke of her dishes with reverence, and soon her clients were no longer just friends and acquaintances, but high-profile figures and businessmen. She was invited to food festivals, and her dishes were featured at local events. What had once been a source of ridicule had now become her greatest strength. Rumors began to swirl through Enugu, but not the kind of gossip that once filled the Okafor house. This was different. People whispered about the woman whose soup changed a room, about how she had silently fought her way into the hearts of everyone she met, with nothing but her food and her courage. Kamsi had become a symbol of strength, resilience, and quiet power. Her reputation grew, and with it, the opportunities. A local restaurant chain approached her for a partnership, wanting to feature her food as a specialty dish. She'd gone from cooking in the shadows in the boys' quarters to standing proudly in the spotlight as a woman in control of her own destiny. Meanwhile, the Okafor family was in disarray. The image they had carefully curated over the years had cracked beyond repair. Ibuka's reputation was tarnished by his inability to defend his wife. His mother, once so proud of her children, now found herself under scrutiny for how she had treated Kamsi. The family's social standing had been shaken, and no amount of power or money could change the way people saw them now. Kamsi had become a story of her own, one that no longer needed their validation. She was her own success, her own strength, and she wasn't looking back. She did visit her grandmother's grave, though, a few months later. She sat beneath the mango tree, the cool breeze whispering through the leaves as she offered a bowl of her famous soup. "I did it, Mama," Kamsi whispered, a soft smile tugging at her lips. "I finally did it." Her grandmother's spirit, strong and proud, seemed to answer her in the quiet of the moment. The woman who had once been silenced, mocked, and underestimated now stood tall, not because of anyone's approval, but because she had found her voice, and with it, a life she had always dreamed of. Weeks later, Kamsi found herself standing at the edge of the old village, where the earth was rich with memories. The sun was setting, casting a warm golden glow over the landscape. She walked slowly, the familiar path beneath her feet feeling like a bridge between the past and the present. In her hands she carried a bowl, the same soup that had once been ridiculed, now a symbol of her strength. At her grandmother's grave, she knelt, placing the bowl gently on the ground. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the quiet surround her. The mango tree that had always stood tall beside the grave swayed gently in the breeze, its leaves rustling like a soft song. Kamsi's heart was full, but her voice was soft, almost a whisper as she spoke to the spirit of the woman who had shaped her. "I did it, Mama," she said, her eyes brimming with quiet pride. "I finally did it." The breeze carried her words into the air, as if the very earth responded in kind. Kamsi sat beneath the tree, her back against its sturdy trunk, feeling the peace she had longed for wash over her. There was no anger, no regret, only the quiet certainty that she had taken control of her life. And in that stillness, she knew she had made her grandmother proud. Months later, Kamsi stood in her small, modest kitchen, the same one where she had once struggled. But now, there was a new energy in the space. The pots and pans were familiar, but they no longer held the weight of fear or doubt. She worked with calm precision, her hands moving over the ingredients with confidence. The soup simmered on the stove, filling the room with its rich aroma. As she plated the dish, she did it with care, each movement deliberate, each step done with purpose. The kitchen, once a place of rejection, had become her sanctuary. She was no longer cooking for anyone's approval, but for herself, for the woman she had become. Kamsi smiled as she set the bowl down, her heart full. The journey had been long, but she had finally found peace, not in the eyes of others, but in her own. And as she stood there, in her modest kitchen, she knew this was just the beginning. Never let the opinions of others define your worth. Your strength lies in believing in yourself and embracing your unique journey. If Kamsi's journey of resilience and self-discovery inspired you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Stay connected for more powerful stories and check out our other videos. There's always more to learn and enjoy. Keep watching.